Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have a very exciting episode for you today. Over the weekend, I was able to sit down with my dear friend S.E. Cupp at Upstate Films in Rhinebeck, New York, for a live audience taping of the Backroom podcast. We're going to get to that in just a second, but first, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, S.E. Cupp is a nationally syndicated columnist, author, podcaster, and TV commentator. She hosts Off the Cupp, a podcast which focuses on mental health and which features interviews with celebrities and newsmakers. She is a columnist at the New York Daily News and has also been published in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, Washington Post, and many other publications. She is currently a political commentator at CNN. She regularly interviews authors for C-SPAN's BookTV and is a regular guest on The View, Real Time with Bill Maher, Jimmy Kimmel Live, Watch What Happens Live, and others. S.E. has also consulted on Aaron Sorkin's The Newsroom and AppleTV's The Morning Show, and has made cameos on House of Cards and Saturday Night Live. As an author, S.E. has written 2 books, Losing Our Religion, The Liberal Media's Attack on Christianity, and co-authored Why You're Wrong About the Right. She is on the advisory board of Cornell University's Institute of Politics and Global Affairs and inara.org, INARA.org, and is a No Kid Hungry ambassador. So without further ado, let's go to Upstate Films in Rhinebeck, New York, for my fun, insightful, very entertaining conversation with my friend, S.E. Cupp.
Okay, welcome everyone to Upstate Films. This is called The Back Room with Andy Ostroy. I was just listening to the last program on the way here. They were talking about Jeff Epstein and Russia and all sorts of things. It was very spicy. And today should be no different. Thanks everyone for coming out. Please welcome Andy Ostroy and S.E. Cupp.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Upstate. And thank you to the Radio Free Rhinecliff team, which helps me produce this podcast. And of course, thank you to S.E. Cupp for coming. So we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff today, but I didn't understand the Epstein reference. What's going on with that? Is there,
I don't know.
There's something in the news about
Who
Jeffrey
is that?
Epstein?
I don't know. Who is that?
Something political happening?
Something.
We'll actually get to Jeffrey Epstein in a second, but
good.
let's start with more spicy stuff. Donald Trump. We just passed the first 6 months of Trump 2.0. Give me your top concerns about what you've seen so far.
I think overarching concern is the normalization of a lot of terrible behavior and decisions and chaos, and normalizing people who are not qualified to be in their cabinet positions, for example, normalizing the weaponization of tariffs, for example, and normalizing not knowing stuff, being okay, normalizing treating our allies terribly and our enemies like they're friends. You get so used to these bad decisions, these anti-democratic and illiberal decisions, that it becomes hard to grasp onto like what's worse, what's the top priority of all of these bad things. And most people are just living their lives. They're not as hyper-focused on all of this as I am, because it's my job, or you are because you're very, very, interested in all of this. Most people are just living their lives, and thank God they are, because it's really dirty and gross, and the standards keep getting lower and lower and lower, and it's at a place where Democrats, and I'm not a Democrat, but Democrats are truly seeming to wrestle with, do we go as low? Is that the plan of attack here? Do we just have to get as gross and mean and dirty? And I can understand that argument of why you might believe that, but it's just really sad to me, and it's deleterious because younger generations are just going to be used to this. They're not going to remember when there was civility or expertise. they're not going to have that institutional knowledge of when politics worked better. You might not have enjoyed the outcomes. You might not have enjoyed this party or this president or that president, but the standards were there. And we're going to sound like old people saying, get off my lawn, when we're telling the young folks how things used to go, because they're just not going to know. I worry that everyone's just getting used to this kind of chaos.
Well, let's stick with that for a second, because I think we could all agree that what we're seeing and what we're experiencing is something we've never, ever experienced before. So when you think about civility and just the typical discourse that people would have politically, so you're right, but it's like, well, what are we supposed to do?
That's what Democrats are wrestling with right now. It's an existential crisis and an existential threat for the midterms in 2028 and beyond. And the short answer is they don't know what to do. And I'm talking to Democrats all the time, and this is an honest truth. They don't know what to do. And so you've seen some attempts. There are the AOCs and the Jasmine Crockett's, who I wouldn't say go low, but they're getting, animated, they're swearing, they're, I think trying to meet the moment with the appropriate level of anger. But, when you look at the protests and the sit-ins and the long speeches on the floor of the House, I don't know what that accomplishes. I don't think that's the answer, and I don't think, if the Democrats' fundamental problem is a lot of people have left that party, and some of those people have stayed home and some of those people have gone to Trump, if that's the fundamental problem, then the solution is that Democrats need to get those people back, and they need to win more people back. I don't think sit-ins are how you do that. I don't think protests are necessarily how you do that. I'm not saying those aren't useful and appropriate, but I don't think that's it. I've told you this before, and I say it as many times as I'm allowed to say it. The Democrats lost, in my opinion, in 2024 because they were telling voters that the three issues they cared about the most, the economy, crime, and immigration, weren't actually problems. You remember Joe Biden said, the economy's strong as hell. That is not how people felt. They said crime is lower. Crime is down. In fact, crime was up. They never revised that, but crime, in fact, was up. And it almost doesn't matter, because if you don't feel safe, you don't care about the numbers, the statistics. And I know every woman in here, especially, knows when they feel safe and when they don't. And I don't need some politician telling me, you're safe. And then on immigration, they said there's no crisis, until they got closer to the election and said, yeah, you're right, it's a crisis. Voters don't like being told that their feelings are wrong. And Trump, for all his problems, correctly identified the problems, said, you're right, these are problems. Now, his solutions are insane. But people felt heard and seen. So Democrats have to work on that messaging, but they also have to work on candidate choice. I don't think Joe Biden was the greatest, and Kamala did a good job with what she was given, but she wasn't the best choice for the moment either. And then they've got to work on some policy issues. And it's really hard as a party to acknowledge maybe some of your policies aren't working the way you think they are. And when it comes to inflationary economic policy, immigration policy, and soft on crime policy, their policies aren't good. One Democrat said to me, we've got bad facts on those issues. Now, that doesn't mean nothing Democrats are doing is working. On abortion, on climate, they are with the majority of Americans on those issues, on democracy, stuff like that. But democracy doesn't put food on the table, and that's how voters were thinking. And I don't begrudge them thinking about their kitchen table issues.
So here we are in July, and you mentioned the phrase before, existential crisis, which we are in. We are also in a constitutional crisis. We're in a crisis, it seems, every hour. Where does that go? We could look in the rearview mirror, and the smart people will do that because that dictates where you're headed. But here we are in July, and it just seems like this administration is trying to burn the house down to the ground. And with the exception of perhaps the lower courts. How do we combat what we're facing right now so that 6 months from now, a year from now, when the midterms come around, that we actually have midterm elections?
It's tough because it's a chicken and egg scenario. You can't do much because Dems are in the minority and have very little power nationally. Look, there's some good news at the state level, the state houses. There's a lot of policy that gets decided at the state level that the federal government has nothing to do with. Curriculum, for example, that's set by state policy. That's not, the Department of Education, and which Trump wants to get rid of. So there's some good news in federalism, and that's the way the system was designed. But you've got to win elections if you're going to effect meaningful change and be a check on Republicans. You can't win elections if you're, not getting your shit together. And the conversations I hear Democrats having aren't really around, let's get a national agenda, a competing agenda. It's not enough to just say Trump is awful and look at how awful he is all the time. Believe me, we tried that. I did that in 2016. I did it. I did it in 2024. But you have to present a competing agenda. You don't like Trump's tariffs? Great. What is your plan to lower inflation? What's your plan to make things more affordable? You don't like the ICE raids because they're gross and awful? Great. What's your plan to combat illegal immigration? Because the majority of Americans don't like illegal immigration. They want solutions for it. If they're not for Trump's, they still want solutions. And sanctuary cities aren't solutions. Those are political responses. So you've got to come up with a competing agenda to win the midterms so that you can ensure democracy exists for the next election. There's no easy way around it. You've got to win again. And I want Democrats, again, even though I'm not a Democrat, I want Democrats to get their shit together. Because when you don't have two strong parties, this country is weaker for it. And I feel like we're in a pretty weakened spot right now globally.
Yeah, you're really raising a very good point, which a lot of Democrats don't like to hear, because that means you have to take responsibility. Now, we could all talk about Donald Trump all we want, but the fact is we lost to a convicted felon, adjudicated sexual abuser, pathologically lying sociopath.
Right.
That doesn't mean you did a good job, okay? That means you failed miserably. So the point is well taken. So it dovetails into something I want to ask you about, because we are seeing something really interesting in New York City with the mayoral candidacy of Zohran Mamdani. We saw the Bernie Sanders AOC rallies. We saw how that was energizing people and still is. Politically, it seems like what may be happening is when the pendulum has swung so far to the right, that the successful counter to that, at least in the short term, might be that the pendulum has to swing so far to the left. Because the people in the middle are kind of lost, right? They have no home. I have a lot of these folks. I just interviewed, my latest episode is with David Frum. And I said to him, to say you were a Republican is like saying Michael Jordan was a basketball player, okay? So this guy was the president of the Harvard Law School Federalist Society. So he was hardcore. He voted for Hillary Clinton. He hates Trump. And so do you think that what we're seeing in New York City is sort of an interesting barometer of where the party needs to go, to your point, before we can all get back to some level of centrism?
Yeah. Well, you're definitely right about the pendulum, and it swings after, most elections are a reaction to the last administration. And so, after Clinton, Bill, no surprise we got a George W. Bush, right? That compassionate conservatism, religious right, as a reaction to Bill Clinton and everything he was. No surprise after W, we got an Obama. We had this sort of grandfatherly caretaker, and then we get, the young, upstart, fresh, progressive voice. So everything's a reaction, and sure, the energy in the Democratic Party right now is clearly on the far left. It's with the AOCs, the Bernies, the Mamdanis. Do I think that's where the party should go to recapture those disaffected Democrats, independents, and moderates who for the first time voted for Donald Trump? No.
And young people.
And young people? No, I don't. I'm not excluding the excitement and energy in that wing, but I don't think that's how you win those people in the middle. And you're right about us. I am orphaned. I was a Republican for a long time. I'm still a conservative because that's a value set that doesn't change, regardless of what Donald Trump says it is. But I'm not a Republican, and they feel the same way about me. But we are orphaned. And the crazy thing is, if you watch a lot of cable news where I live, you definitely walk away with the impression that we are either all over here or all over here. And most of us, the majority of this country's in the middle on like every single issue. We've talked about this before, but if you take an issue like abortion, for example, since 1976, when Gallup first started polling abortion attitudes in America, those attitudes have remained fixed on a straight line. Since 1976 until now, the majority opinion in this country about abortion has always been that abortion should be legal with restrictions. Under that is a minority opinion that abortion should be legal in all cases. And way under that, it's always been a straight line, the very minority opinion has been that abortion should be illegal in all cases. That hasn't changed. That means most people in this country are in the middle on that issue. But folks on the left talk about no restrictions. Folks on the right talk about no abortions. Who's my representative? Who's my party? Who's talking for me? Most people feel that way. So that's a long way of saying, I don't think Democrats should go to the fringe, where the excitement is, to win back the majority of people who are in the middle and feel orphaned and homeless. I don't think that's smart politics. I know it feels good, but I don't think it's smart politics.
Well, we're going to see how smart it is or not when the election actually happens, and if those people you're talking about are able to be swept up in that vote. Or does the election end up with a re-election of Eric Adams because Democrats were unable to attract those people who have certain issues that Mamdani might not be speaking to. But let's get back to Epstein. Why is this such an issue with MAGA? Why is this the thing? Not like the lies, the criming, the grifting, the attack on due process and democracy, the Epstein files.
Because they created it. The conspiracy theories around Epstein were cultivated and fomented by MAGA voices, including Trump and lots of other folks that you know, Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk and Jack Posobiec and Dave Smith and Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi. These are the people who cultivated that because, and I know this from a long history in the news, when you start going down the rabbit hole to give conspiracy theorists what they want, there's no up. There's only further down. And when you're Tucker Carlson, you know, someone I know, when you're Tucker Carlson on Fox News and you're dabbling in conspiracy theories, like what happened to Seth Rich, that DNC staffer who was murdered? What did Hillary really do? What really was behind Jan 6th and, false flags? And when you start dabbling, your audience wants more of it. And you have to keep giving them more of what they want. We've seen this over and over again. I don't know if you guys remember a person named Lara Logan. She was an award-winning, very well-respected war reporter for CBS. She got, like I said, lots of awards. She was really well-respected. She messed up on a story about Benghazi and was let go. And I don't know what happened in her brain, but she started going down these conspiracy theories. And she started doing it at Fox. She went a little too far at Fox. She compared Anthony Fauci to Joseph Mengele. That was delightfully a bridge too far for Fox. They let her go. She ended up going on to Newsmax, where she started saying that Ukrainians want to eat the blood of children. But bonkers stuff. She was fired from Newsmax. Now I think she's employed by like Mike Lindell's My Pillow YouTube channel. That's not a joke. I think that's true. But because there's no up, there's only down. So when these folks, the Bonginos, Dan Bongino, before he was at the FBI, he had a podcast. Those were his qualifications. He trafficked in a lot of these conspiracy theories. He conditioned the audience for this conspiracy and many others, and to want more of it. Well, now he's on the other side. Now he's in a position at the FBI to tell these same people, the people who are rabidly listening to his podcast, we were wrong. He committed suicide. There's no client list. You need to stop thinking about this conspiracy. There's no stopping. And I've talked to conspiracy theory experts who say, that's the entire point of conspiracy theories. It's that they're never done. There's never a conclusion. You don't get an answer. And if you are a theorist, you don't want the answer. You're there for the speculation, the rumors, the whispers, the gossip, the dark web. You're there for that. You're not there to solve a mystery. So they're trying to turn off a spigot that they turned on in the first place. And they're expecting, because I guess of their position of power, that people just listen to them. That is not how you trained them to be. So it's a conundrum. It's a conundrum for MAGA. They started it. They want it to be over. There's no stopping.
Well, if you watch your network and MSNBC, people are talking about how this could very well be a huge rift in the MAGA sphere. And it could be the thing that ultimately turns some of these folks against Trump. I'm not convinced of that because they're in a cult. But they do feel betrayed. They feel that they were promised that these blood-drinking, grooming liberals are going to be prosecuted and sent to prison, and it's all these rich, famous, the Clintons, Obama, whoever. And now they're told there's no there. Go away. It's over. Done. And for Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, in February said, it's right here on my desk.
I've seen the videos.
It's right here.
And
now she says there's no list. So she was either lying when she said that, or she's lying now. And there are calls, Laura Loomer, key voices, Tucker Carlson, Andrew Schultz, Joe Rogan. A lot of these folks are starting to voice concern that what they voted for, what they believe in, is not what's happening. So do you think, knowing how you have watched MAGA over the years, is there any there, or is this a week from now there'll be 5 other Trump catastrophes and we'll be forgetting what happened? Can you tell me what happened last week with Trump?
Right. No, it's B. The answer's B. Because I can tell you, last week these very same people were outraged over the Iran strikes. Right. This isn't what we voted for. And you heard the Candace Owens and the Dave Smiths coming out and saying, what happened to America First? What happened to non-interventionism? This isn't what we voted for. Okay, they're on to the next beef, which is Epstein. And midterms are 15 months, 16 months away. It's a really long time. That's a lifetime in politics. That's one. 2, do you really think the Candace Owens, the Dave Smiths, Charlie Kirks, are going to vote for Democrats in the midterm? Do you really think they're not going to vote for whoever's the MAGA-iest candidate in 2028? Of course they are. So I don't know that, they're, I think, performatively talking about how disappointed they are. But even if that's real, even if they're genuinely disappointed, I still don't think they're going anywhere.
But could Laura Loomer get Bondi fired in the way she got Mike Waltz fired?
Well, it might be Dan Bongino. Dan Bongino's now saying it's me or her.
Right.
And I'm hearing Kash Patel might join that as well.
It's so delicious, all of it.
I'm sure it is. This cannibalism, it's like an Ouroboros, the snake that eats its tail. But there's something you said. They were promised things. What idiot believes the promises of Trump and MAGA. Why would you believe anything? And I'm saying this as an outsider. If you were promised stuff in 2016, stuff that you didn't get, either because constitutionally Trump couldn't do it, or Congress wouldn't let him when Congress cared, whatever the reason, there was stuff you didn't get. You didn't get a wall that Mexico paid for. You didn't get stuff that you wanted. Why would you trust you're going to get the stuff that they're promising this time? That's on you, not you. That's on you, Dave Smith, Candace Owens, for believing any promises, So, again, I feel like a lot of this is performative. I'm so disappointed. This isn't what I voted for. No one cares. Nobody cares. This is exactly what you voted for. This is 100% what you voted for. Live with it. Defend it. This is how you made your money. This is how you got into your grift, right? Whether you did it because you believed in it or to make money or whatever, this is what you're doing. Do it. Defend it. Isn't that your job? Isn't that the point of you? The point of me at this point, ostracized from the Republican Party and not a Democrat, the point for me is to call balls and strikes now. Say, you're messing up, you guys are messing up, you guys are terrible, you guys don't know what you're doing. That's where I exist now, because I need to sleep at night and feel like I'm telling some truths. But if you're Candace Owens, that's not why you exist. You exist because you think Emmanuel Macron's wife is a man. And that's the bullshit conspiracy theory you're dining out on. Well, is there really a huge break here for you? So, I mean, it's hard to take these people seriously. But to answer your question, I don't think they're really going anywhere. And in a week or two, they'll be on to some other thing.
Well, the only hope for me when I look at it is like, you're right, like Tucker Carlson, he's not going anywhere. Laura Loomer, she's not going anywhere. But if people like Joe Rogan, if he uses his platform and he can convince, just by the way he talks, end up convincing 10% of his audience that, oh my God, I made the wrong choice here. Same with Andrew Schultz. That may move the needle. But I think a lot of these people are just too entrenched, so I agree with you. Let's shift to pop culture. A lot of people know you from CNN. They know you from news, from politics and all that. Most people don't know that you're a true crime buff, that you also produce. Tell us about that part of your life and what you might be doing in that area right now.
Well, years ago, I started looking outside of news and including like being on camera to do other stuff. And that includes I develop shows for reality television. I love Bravo. So I'm in development meetings with Bravo, A&E for some true crime stuff, for docuseries stuff. That's my way to be creative outside of awful politics. And politics just got so awful. It used to be really fun doing what I do.
And boring.
And boring, which I love. I love boring. I have a lot of anxiety, and so boring is great for me. I needed to find other things to occupy my time, and those choices were some philanthropic work and also some outside development stuff. So that's a way that I can do what I do and use 20 years of experience in another outlet and area. So that's, for me, I have a mental health podcast. That's my escape from politics and, going into Bravo meetings and talking about, I have this great idea for a reality show, some soapy,
The Real Housewives of CNN.
This has been discussed. No, that's a way that I can keep working and enjoy what I do when so much of what I do is really, really gross and not fun.
So we just had a couple of major trials in this country. And, I'm a true crime buff too, which some people, when they hear me say that, go, seriously? You had a wife who was murdered?
It's a little morose, Andy,
but I was into true crime before that, My late wife and I, Adrienne Shelley, who was murdered in 2006, we used to lie in bed and watch this show, Autopsy, at night on HBO with Dr. Michael Baden.
I know Dr. Baden.
Okay. We'd watch this show together.
Yeah.
I ended up hiring him to do an autopsy when, during those first 4 or 5 days, Adrienne was believed to have been a suicide. That's how crazy my life is. But I want to hear your opinion on what happened with Diddy and with Karen Reed, if you have any.
I did not follow the Karen Reed story. by the time I got to it, there was so much. It would be like coming into a Real Housewives franchise like 7 seasons in. And I just felt I was too out of it, so I didn't follow that. Diddy I followed. And what a miscarriage of justice. Because I feel similarly about the Casey Anthony story. We know what happened. OJ, we know what happened. We know what happened. The lawyers might have gotten it right in how they defended these 3 people. Certainly in OJ's case, I don't think the prosecution did a great job. In Casey Anthony's case, I don't think the prosecution did a great job. But it doesn't mean we like the outcome. We saw videos. We know what he did. It's awful and gross. And now, if he gets back released into the world, imagine being Cassie. Imagine being anyone he has ever hurt. And the fear she must have and they must have. It's awful and gross. And I don't think anyone except his very close fans feel like that was justice.
And another thing, which a lot of people had some interesting thoughts on, was this vomitously lavish Bezos wedding. Like, to spend that kind of money, was that wrong for him to do? Or if he's incredibly wealthy, why not?
Wrong, like morally?
Reading a room kind of wrong.
Okay, well, there's that. There's optically, this was terrible. Like, at this time, terrible optically. You're not winning any fans. Morally, I think it was pretty gross too. If I had that money, I wouldn't spend it like that. It wasn't illegal, but I don't think it was a great look. I don't think they care, though, is the thing. I've heard he's trying to buy Vogue so that she can be the new editor. Whether you like Vogue or not, the journalism of it all is so bothersome to me.
He's done so well with the Washington Post. So
yeah.
You also have a podcast, which I love. I've been on it, but the concept of it is so awesome because, like you said before, it's to get away from politics. You have a history with dealing with mental health issues. You've been very open about that. That is such an important thing for people to publicly talk about and share their experiences. So talk about the podcast a little and how you got to start it and what it's about.
Well, thank you. And your episode was so great. The podcast is called Off the Cupp. Go listen to his episode. It was terrific. It came because a friend of mine, Charlemagne the God, if you know, he's a podcaster, producer as well. He has a network at iHeart, and he wanted me to come into his network. And he said to iHeart, I want to bring in Essie, and I want her to do anything that she wants. And so iHeart said, we want to give you a podcast inside Charlemagne's network, and it can be on anything you want. And I said, okay, I don't want it to be politics. I said, oh. Okay, maybe not anything you want. And I was like, no, I want it to be on mental health. And they said, oh, and that matters a lot to Charlemagne. He talks a lot about his mental health. So they said, oh, okay, yeah, go do that. So we set it up. It's an interview show. I interview celebrities. And it's not a mental health podcast in that we sit down and we talk immediately about your mental health. It's biographical. I wanted to create a space where mental health could come up naturally in conversation because I want to model that in the world. I want mental health to come up naturally and no one to be afraid of talking about it. So, my therapist said the other day, that kind of opening line. So we go through biography and, of course, mental health comes up when you're talking about, okay, your career arc. This was a tough time for you. What'd you do to get through it? That's a mental health conversation. Or a loss. That's a mental health conversation. Or getting older and what that's like. That comes up all the time when I'm talking to celebrities about their lives and aging. So I'm really enjoying that, and it's super gratifying in a way that talking about politics is not today. It's really fulfilling. It helps me. I learn stuff on the podcast all the time. Tips and tricks and have you tried this? So great. And my mantra with all of this is when you talk about mental health, it makes it easier to talk about mental health. That's the whole point. That's the whole goal here. It's not that my story's so interesting. It isn't. It's mundane, in fact. But we need to just be able to talk about it more and more easily without a stigma, without the silence around it.
And this segues into the last subject I want to ask you about, which is caffeine and coffee.
You're bringing up a very sore subject.
Because you end each episode of your podcast by asking your guests what you claim is the most important question of all, which is, when is it iced coffee season?
This is a spiritual question for me.
Is there a consensus with people?
Okay, so first of all, I'm from Massachusetts. Okay.
Duncan.
Right. My parents are here. They will attest. When I'm like 15 or 16, I have the poster of the original Dunkin' Donuts in Quincy, Mass. on my wall. I want for Christmas Dunkin' Donuts merch. Okay? I remember like the canister I had. Okay. It's a part of me. It's a huge part. It's like my entire personality is Dunkin' Donuts. Okay. So the asking the iced coffee question is existential. It's very important to me. It's religious. This is a sore subject, though, because on this podcast, I also made a confession. Recently.
No, you didn't go to Starbucks.
No, I switched to decaf.
Even worse.
I know. I have so much shame around this. It's really tough to talk about, but it got to the point where caffeine was probably because like everything going wrong in my life right now, perimenopause. Caffeine was acting differently for me suddenly. It was making me tired and jittery, and so my mom was visiting, and she's like, "Why aren't you having coffee?" And I was like, "Well, this is what's happening to my body now. I can't even have coffee anymore." And she's like, "What about decaf?" And I'm like, I have never even considered that as a category of coffee. Totally wrote it off. Don't go to decaf. That's for weak losers. But I've switched to decaf, and my life is so much better because not only can I enjoy coffee, I can have more of it than I ever could. So life is good again. The consensus, there is not a consensus to this question. And I'll get everything from the correct answer, which is iced coffee season is year-round. And then they get an accompanying applause. To, I don't drink coffee. Just like, I don't know why you're even here then, but okay. To, iced coffee season is like June to, no, it's not. But okay, I appreciate that scientific answer. We get all kinds of answers. And that's the beauty of the question. It's a really fun, silly question. But, it opens up a conversation about you. And, I had Mark Duplass on, who's a great actor. He's on the morning show. And he said, well, I have a complicated relationship with coffee right now. Tell me more. He started doing these hikes, and the coffee wasn't good for him on these hikes, if you know what I mean. Being out in the woods all day, right? This is him telling me, learning so much about him. So he switched to tea, green tea, and it's just a door into, some kind of fun layer of your life that might not come up otherwise. But coffee is really important to me.
We'll end on what I think is the
What
most...
did you say?
The most...
What did you say? I think
I'm
you
a
said,
liberal, so I probably said drink iced coffee whenever you want.
You said, yeah, I think that's what you said. I think you said whenever you want.
Yeah, whenever you want.
It's a great answer.
Here's what I think is the most important question, because we live in such a toxically tribal world right now. Are you able to be friends with people who don't drink iced coffee all year round?
Oh. Yes.
Can't we all just get along?
I can. It's not my favorite, but I can. And, I married a person who's also from New England and in fact drinks more coffee than I do. And it's definitely a bond. And to be with someone who has the same life goals is really important. And we do. So in life and in friendships, it's nice to be around people who like what you like. That doesn't mean I can't be friends with people who don't like iced coffee.
That should be the question that young people ask each other, not like
Yes.
what religion you want to raise our children. Do you drink iced coffee all year round?
Where is coffee in your life?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to end on that note, and I think we have time for some questions. If anybody has a question,
Not Dad, please. Don't heckle me up here.
I have a question for Dad.
Oh, good.
Was she always this awesome?
Okay, thank you.
Good. That's a great
Hi.
dad answer.
Hi.
Hello. I want to come back to the description of the pendulum that you were talking about earlier between left and right and those extremes. And also you were talking about how some of the right-wing agitators will leap from one thing to another and they'll criticize Trump and they'll do things, but it doesn't really stick. I keep on thinking about this in terms of attention and the grift. And my question is, how does the left capture attention, or how does centrism capture attention in this place where the extremes are the thing that get the clicks?
Well, that's a great question. Chris Hayes has a great book out right now about the attention economy and how it's abused and also misused and also overlooked, specifically by the left. Like, they've not figured out how to capture that attention and the center the way that Republicans and MAGA clearly have, which is odd because you hear a lot about the liberal media, right? And liberals owning the media. And it's true-ish, and I've worked at Fox, MSNBC, CNN. I've seen all the spectrums. It's true in that most journalists who go into the media are liberal and secular. That's just true. But you cannot argue that the right has not dominated the media. Whether it's Fox, they were real first to online and radio as well, right-wing radio, and that's actually how I came up, through right-wing media. They've just done a really good job. There was a gap in the marketplace that Roger Ailes first saw and delivered, gave people what they want. Now that's devolved as the standards for journalism have devolved. So it's no longer about journalism, it's about sort of infotainment, which is another thing. But clearly the right has figured out how to do this. I'm not sure how the middle does that, because I'm in the middle. And I feel like I'm screaming into a vacuum when I go on CNN and I talk about, well, Democrats are messing up and Republicans are crazy. And I feel like this is my running joke. Is this on? Is anybody can anyone hear this? Because it's just not what people are there for. Especially if you're talking about cable news. People who watch cable news are there to have their opinions reaffirmed back. And cable news is a business of supply and demand. You want that, we'll give it to you. If you want it differently, if you wanted C-SPAN, we'd all act like C-SPAN. Promise. But that's not what the majority of viewers are there for. Now, the good news for centrism, the good news in this is pick your top performing, top-rated Fox News host. I don't know if it's Sean now or whoever it is, doesn't matter. 2% of the viewing population are tuning in to Hannity's show any given night. And that would be the same, a little less, with like Rachel or whoever on CNN. Most people aren't, in fact, watching cable news. They're watching sports, they're watching Netflix, they're watching, listening to podcasts, streamers. Most people are tuning this out, actually. What happens, though, is you get to the midterms, which benefit and reward extremism. That's, I think, the first tweak, is looking at midterms and the way they incentivize extremism in your candidate and the people who go out to vote. If you can fix that, I think that goes a long way to capturing a lot more attention in the middle. But it's a really tough, ask, because the most vocal people are not demanding more attention to the middle, right? They're demanding more attention from the left and the right. So it's sort of like a self-feeding animal.
Hi, this has been great. I wonder what Democrats you see as being potential future candidates or just bringing the party together.
Great question, and thank you for asking that. I do. I worry they're not the ones the party will want, but I'm a big fan. I've long been a big fan of Tim Ryan, he's a congressman from Ohio. I adore him for lots of reasons. Rust Belt Democrat, all those blue dogs that left, I think really respond to someone like Tim Ryan, who talks like a normal person, not like a coastal, progressive. And he has a great line. It's one of many, but I had him on a few years ago when he was running. I think he was running to replace Nancy Pelosi as speaker. It was not going to happen, but he wanted to sort of put his face out there. And there was a line he would use where he said, "I'm running for the people who shower after work." And that's so evocative. And you hear that if you're that voter, you shower after work because you're working with your hands, you're working on the assembly line at the construction site. You get that. He doesn't have to explain what that means. And so I love the way he talks. I love that he will call out his own party for the nonsense. I love Seth Moulton. He's a congressman from Massachusetts who served. He's gotten a lot of heat from Democrats for calling out what he thinks is sort of like the crazy wing of the party. I think he's great. I like Eric Swalwell. I know he's a California Democrat, but he talks like a normal person. And I think he's relatable. He's young. He's energetic. I think in both parties, we need candidates who don't viscerally remember being at D-Day. Like, we need candidates who can capture younger voters. And we keep putting up these 80-year-olds and wonder why, like, we're missing people. Yeah. So those are just three. And like I said, I worry that they're not big enough names. The Democrats are going to want to go with bigger people. But I think that's where the party should go, to those kinds of folks.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your perspective. So I'm one of the people that criticizes the Democratic Party on a regular basis, and I'm ostracized for it. I'm told I'm ripping the party apart.
Yeah.
However, dovetailing back to what you were talking about, it seems to me that the only way we are going to be able to start to bring this party back together is to figure out where the flaws are.
Yes.
And figure out who needs to get out. And so the thing I'm concerned about the most is obviously the age of leadership and their fecklessness.
I want Democrats to think in that way. And I speak from experience. If you remember 2012, the Republicans did an autopsy, famously, after Mitt Romney lost. I worked on that autopsy. Specifically, I was tasked with coming up with messaging and policy ideas that would bring back millennials, minorities, women, and LGBTQ. And so we worked really hard on that because we'd been sent to the woodshed in 2012. And when you're sent to the woodshed, you shut up and think about what you've done. That's what you need to do. And looking at messaging is one thing. Looking at candidate selection is another. Looking at policy is really hard and important. And I alluded to this earlier with Democrats and looking at their policies around the three things that matter most to voters: economy, immigration, and crime. It's really hard to admit that your policies aren't working. It's really hard to admit that. But once you do, and I was looking at some tax policy in the Republican Party that was punitive for young people who didn't want to get married, young people who didn't want to buy a house, right? You have to look at these things because you need to present a competing agenda. You need ideas and solutions. You can't just grandstand. You can't just be mad. You can't just protest and sit in. So this is the work Democrats need to be doing. And it is painful. Necessarily, it's painful. But if they're just going to put their fingers in their ears and say, Trump's so bad, and we just need to focus on how bad Trump is, they're not going to win. I just know that. So I'm glad you're thinking about it this way. And don't stop talking about it and think about it, because it's out of love, I'm sure. It's out of urgency. And I feel the same urgency.
Right. And just as a follow-up, I briefly get concerned that as time goes by, we allow our politicians to function as an advertising company should be messaging for the Democrats, right? As we should have experts that are talking about how you deal with people that are in a cult. And I feel like the Democrats are so resistant to using people that can give really strong advice. I mean, Mark Elias, who's a tremendous attorney, is doing so much for this country. You know, he was kicked out of the Biden administration for being like too aggressive. And so do you think that there's room for people in the party who are going to be able to admit, you know what, we're not really good at this, and the conclusions we keep drawing are so bad, and we don't really know what the hell we're doing, so perhaps we should bring other people in?
But of course, look what happened when people protected Joe Biden and didn't tell him about polls, didn't tell him, you're not going to win this. That does nobody good. So yeah, you need people in the party to tell the hard truths and the tough love. And, you know, while I don't support necessarily every Democratic policy, I need Democrats to get better, because they're the only alternative today. Maybe in future there will be more alternative parties, but today they're the only alternative to stopping what I think is an existential threat to democracy and this corruption and devolution of standards in public service. So if that's my only option, they've got to figure it out. I want them to figure it out.
You know, the thing that I've been watching, if you look at Trump, for all his warts, you do have to give him credit for the fact that his base sees him as authentic, right? Bernie Sanders, authentic. Yeah. AOC, authentic. Mamdani, authentic. And what those politicians are telling us is that Americans, voters, want authenticity. They don't want over-consulted bullshit artists. Eric Swalwell is amazing because he does talk like a human being. And that's the fertile landscape right now. And the key question is, are Democrats going to be able to recognize that and capitalize on that, or just keep serving up the same politicians cycle after cycle?
Yeah, you're so right. And it's why people like you too, because you're incredibly authentic. I was saying in 2016 about the Democratic primary, Hillary and Bernie. I was saying, because you'd go to these like Bernie rallies, or I did because I had to cover them, and there's just so much more energy than was at like a Hillary rally. And the way I described it was Bernie was a cause and Hillary was a corporation. And she ended up winning the nomination because the DNC was, so behind her. But people don't want to vote for a corporation, they want to vote for a cause. And to MAGA, Trump is a cause. He is something they believe in deeply. And Democrats haven't found that person since Obama. There's a wing that loves Bernie. I don't think Bernie's going to win a national election.
Personally, I'm in love with Gavin Newsom's hair.
Yeah. So is Gavin Newsom.
So I'm getting fully behind Gavin Newsom's hair. Even if I have to write it in.
Yep.
Gavin Newsom's hair.
Yeah.
He's my candidate. The hair.
Gavin loves his hair as well.
Hi. I promise this is not a political one. SC, I'm also a mental health advocate and writer, and so I'm so grateful for your podcast.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, what more can we do to chip away at the stigma that still exists? And now that there's a lack of empathy towards people with mental health issues, what can we be doing more of? Thank you.
Well, you and I are important voices. We're not the most important voices. The most important voices in this are men of a certain age and men of color. In communities of color, barriers to getting mental health help are systemically higher. And also there's just a bigger stigma. And for men of a certain age, there's a bigger stigma as well. So it's important that you and I as women talk about these issues, especially as they impact moms and our kids. But it's really important when Charlemagne or Jalen Rose talks about these, Jalen Rose was an athlete, talks about mental health, or Michael Phelps talks about mental health. This is so impactful. I hear this a lot, that it's just so impactful. And when celebrities do it, I've interviewed Naomi Osaka, who's talked about her mental health, and Simone Biles. Like, these are people you look at as successful, highly tuned athletes. When they admit that and talk openly about it, it has a really big reach and impact too. So the short answer is talk about mental health, because it makes it easier to talk about mental health. But the real impact is going to come when other generations and other demos start talking more about it.
Essie, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you so much. I adore you. You know that. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you for coming, and thank you, Upstate Films.
Thank you.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.